Thank you for still being here. I don't know what time you all started out for this tonight, but I started at 5 o'clock this morning. And I just got out of the car in the parking lot. Had a great flight down from Washington, not a cloud in the sky. Landed at DFW, I think it was at 10:30. Had an hour to wait, so I killed the time by buying myself a new pair of boots. Went over, took the little train, got on the airplane. Beautiful day. Went out to the end of the runway, and suddenly there was this black cloud, and the pilot said, they've asked us to just stand by here for a minute because there's a front coming through. We were there for 2 hours, and you know, they now have the new regulation. You can't keep people on the airplane more than 2 hours. So we came back, we got to the terminal. They said, I'm sorry, we have no information. The airport is totally closed down. So that's when I called the folks down here. We found a car. I jumped in the car, got to Waco just in time for the 5 o'clock traffic, and then got here just in time for the track meet traffic. I was 20 minutes out here just trying to make that left turn, but by golly, I'm here. I tell you, you know, there are speeches and there are speeches, but this is one I was determined to come because Walter Cronkite, I mean, I'll be very honest about this. Walter Cronkite was who I wanted to be when I was a young kid growing up. And in fact, Walter Cronkite is still who I want to be. And Lyndon Johnson was the first politician I ever knew about. And some of you may have been here. I spoke a couple of years ago at the LBJ School commencement. I told the story about the first time I knew about Lyndon Johnson. He was the first politician I knew about. I was 11 years old. It was 1948. Truman was running against Dewey, and Lyndon Johnson was running for the United States Senate. And we heard he was coming to the vacant lot on the northwest side of Fort Worth where we played baseball. And this was a huge event in our community. And we all went down to the vacant lot to see him. And my dad took me down there, and the guys I played baseball with, their dads took them. And we were all down there. And the reason we were so excited about it is because we had heard he was coming in a helicopter. And of course, none of us had ever seen a helicopter. So there we were. And all of a sudden, up in the sky, this airplane with no wings on it, and on this electronic bullhorn, this is your candidate for the United States Senate, Lyndon B. Johnson. We didn't know if this was Lyndon Johnson, if it was God. We were absolutely terrified. I always said, you know, at that moment, I knew how Moses felt when he realized that burning bush was talking right at him. That's how we felt. And that helicopter landed, and Johnson got out, never took off his hat, made this rousing speech, and at the end of this speech, took that hat off, threw it out into the crowd, and then waved goodbye, got on that helicopter and flew away. I mean, who could forget a day like that? I told that story later to Jake Pickle, your longtime congressman from here in Austin. And Jake said, oh, yeah, that was my job in the campaign. And I said, what do you mean? He said, I was the hat catcher. And I said, he said, let me tell you something. He said, Lyndon Johnson was the tightest man on the face of the earth. He said he wasn't going to waste a hat on a rally. And he said, I was going to University of Texas, and said, whenever that helicopter, wherever it was going to land, he said, I'd drive there in my car, I'd get out, and I'd stand on the front row. And he said, when he saw me, he'd throw that hat to me. I'd take the hat, run around behind the helicopter, give it to him, and then they'd fly on to the next location. So to be here, to honor Walter Cronkite at the LBJ Library, is one of the special evenings for me, and I was determined that I was going to be here tonight. You know, LBJ liked Walter, Walter liked LBJ, and I have to tell you, I loved both of them, and I'm just really proud to be here tonight. Everything I know about being a reporter, everything I know about being objective, about how to tell a story. In fact, Walter not only taught me that, but he taught me the most important thing of all, and it was not a hard thing, this part, to tell me. He taught me how to love the news, because that was the great secret of Walter's success. He loved the news. No one would have enjoyed this exhibit opening, I've got to tell you. No one would have enjoyed it more than Walter Cronkite himself. He loved things like this, and he loved to talk about the news. There may be one person who would have enjoyed it more than Walter, and that would be Betsy, and I'll tell you why. Some years ago, when they moved to the UN Plaza in New York from their townhouse on the Upper East Side of New York, someone asked Betsy, said, "Are you going to miss the townhouse?" And she said, "You know, what I'm really going to miss is the backyard." And they said, "Oh, well, you're a gardener?" She said, "No, but it was such a great place to bury all those awards that Walter kept bringing home." So Betsy would be glad to know they found a place to put all that stuff. And I know she's up there smiling down on this occasion tonight. Walter Cronkite had the trait that most journalists that I have known, the really good ones, have. And that trait is curiosity. Walter Cronkite was the most curious person I have ever known in my life. If we heard a car wreck happening out in that traffic jam out there right now, Walter would want to run out there. It would be like he'd never seen a car wreck in his life before. He'd want to go out there. He'd want to see who was involved, what happened, was anybody hurt, and he'd probably be out there taking notes. I remember one time, many years ago, on a trip, I think Jimmy Carter was president, and we were in London. And we had done our pieces at the BBC, that's where the satellite was that day, and we were going back to our hotel in London. And all of a sudden, a police car and an ambulance pulled around our taxi and went screaming out up ahead. And for the first time in my life, other than the movies, I actually heard somebody, and it was Walter, say, "Follow that cab," and follow that police car. And so we did. And Walter said, "You know, the IRA is very busy. This could be something very serious." And so sure enough, we got up there, and what it was a car wreck. But guess who got to get out and go check it out to make sure it wasn't the IRA at work again? But that's the way Walter was. He had this habit, and the reason he was such a great editor was Walter could always think of the question that nobody else thought to ask, and that was the mark of a great editor. But unfortunately, he would always think of these questions, say, along about 6:20. Well, the news comes on at 6:30. And these things became known as WWs, Walter Wants, and it would throw the entire news organization into a tizzy while we tried to chase down these answers to these questions that Walter would ask. And here are the kind of questions that he would ask. How much oil is there in the world? Well, who the hell knows how much oil there is in the world? I mean, did you ever wonder about that? Walter would want to know, and we'd have to chase it down. Or he'd looked up one day, sitting there editing copy, and said, in Poland, do they call him Santa Claus or Father Christmas? Beats me. But my all-time favorite, and I heard him say it one day, and it must have been 6:28, he looked up from his copy and said, "How long is Greenland?" There you go. Right. I have to say, I had never wondered about that, but Walter wanted to know, and as it turned out, we found the answer to that. Walter used to call the reporters out on the beat, and not to tell us what to do, but just to inquire as to what was going on, and he would always ask some question that you never knew the answer to. But one day, I was covering the White House, and Walter called, and I actually, for once, had the answer. And Walter said, "Well, thank you, Bob. This old gray head just had a question mark above it." Walter really talked that way. He really did. And that is the great thing about Walter Cronkite, and the great thing I learned about Walter when I came to CBS News. He was exactly off camera as he was on camera. You know, we've all met celebrities, and sometimes we find, especially if they're movie stars, we liked them and everything, and we realize after we met them that we really don't like them much at all, that what we'd fallen in love with is the characters that they played. That was not the case with Walter. He was exactly the way we all thought he was. In fact, I would say he was the way we all wanted him to be. And that was the great part of working for Walter Cronkite. The other part about Walter that was so great is that Walter kept his priorities in order. He loved what he was doing. I hear all of these people now that feel so put upon by the public. And, you know, I remember when we went through this stuff with Tiger Woods, you know. After all that happened, I recall back that when Tiger was 21 years old, the first year he won the Masters, he was having lunch with Arnold Palmer in the clubhouse at the Masters in the men's locker room. And he was bemoaning the fact that he couldn't do what other 21-year-olds could do, that he had all these responsibilities that he had to tend to. He said, I just can't be a normal 21-year-old. And Arnold Palmer said to him that day, you're not a normal 21-year-old. Do you want to be a normal 21-year-old? And he said, yes. And Arnold Palmer said, well, give back the money. Then you'll be normal. It's true. Too many times what we find out about these public figures are stories like that. I never saw Walter Cronkite ever be rude or even curt or even quick with someone who came up to talk to him. And a lot of people did. And whenever they did, he was always courteous, and it was more than just being courteous. He was truly interested in people. If you like the news, Walter liked you. You know, Harvey Penick, who was a great golf teacher here in Austin, Harvey used to say, if you're a golfer, you're my friend. Well, if you like the news, Walter liked you. But he always kept his priorities straight. He liked nothing more than going out with his friends at night, having a couple of drinks, and talking about the news. I remember once, it's one of my favorite memories of Walter, we were at a book party in New York, and it was a real turnout of the media. And Tom Brokaw was there, and Dan Rather was there, and Peter Jennings was there, and I was there, and we were all standing there talking, and I thought, wouldn't this be a great picture to get these people and Walter Cronkite all in the same photo at the same time? So I went over to Walter, who was over at the bar, and I said, Walter, would you come over here? I said, Brokaw and Rather and all of them are over there. I'd like to get a picture. Walter said, could you ask him to come over here? He said, I'm trying to get a drink, and I don't want to lose my place at the bar. It's true. Walter just loved things like that, and he loved nothing better than to get together with his friends and talk like that. The other part was that if Walter loved anything more than that, it was a scoop. I have never seen anybody that enjoyed a scoop more than Walter, and I will tell you about the one that I remember most of all. The year was 1976, and the two big stories in 76, Gerald Ford had become our first unelected president, and he was running to try to win the office in his own right against Jimmy Carter, who at that time was a candidate so unknown that people called him Jimmy Who. The other big story, other than the campaign, was the flu shots that were going around. This was the first year of the flu shots. And so because of that, everybody was wondering, are these things going to work? They were making a lot of people sick. And in fact, there was a question as to whether President Ford himself would even take a flu shot. So that was the big story going around. Well, We all went up. I was the White House correspondent in those days, along with Brokaw and Helen Thomas and a lot of other notorious and infamous names that you probably, some of you will remember. But anyway, the campaign went up to New York, and they made some excuse for going up there, but the real reason that they went up there was so Walter could be interviewed by Barbara Walters, who, not Walters, so President Ford could be interviewed by Barbara Walters, who at that time was the host of the Today Show. And she interviewed Walter at mid-morning and then put out the fear of God to all around. She told the White House staff, if anyone else interviews Walter before my interview airs on the Today Show tomorrow morning, that person will be killed, and you will be held responsible, and I will know who allowed this to happen. Barbara, Walter always said, was his most formidable competitor and the one he feared most scooping him, and I came to understand exactly why he felt that way. She was a great reporter. She is still a great reporter. She still has that determination and drive. But she had interviewed the president, and she put out word no one was supposed to interview him until that interview aired the next day on the Today Show. Well, that was bad enough. But then the next thing I know, I get a phone call from Walter. He said, Bob, I understand the president is going on up to Yonkers later today and make a campaign speech. I thought I might come out on the campaign trail. Do you mind? What was I going to say? No, Walter, we'll handle it. You just stay back there. I said, well, of course, Walter. But I said, Walter, I got to tell you something. I said, I got a little bad news. I said, Barbara Walters has interviewed the president, and she has an exclusive. He said, well, I'd like to interview the president. And I said, well, Walter, that's going to be pretty hard. I don't know. And he said, well, will you check into it? So and something like that happens, you always do the obvious thing. I went to the press secretary and said, do you think it might be possible that Walter could interview? Well, I just got a sneer as a response. And so I went next to the president's young chief of staff. Now, in those days, I called him Dick. I would later come to call him Mr. Vice President, Dick Cheney. He was 32 years old. He was Gerald Ford's chief of staff. And I must say, one of the best staff men, open, accessible, that I have ever run into. And I said, Dick, do you think there's any way in the world that we could get an interview with? No, Bob, he said, we're not going to authorize any interviews. He said, we have given our word to Barbara Walters. We're just not going to do that. And I said, well, let me ask you this. Do you think there is any way that maybe we could just get Walter in to say hello to the president? I said, I know the president likes Walter, and he likes the president, and I just a little memento, a souvenir. And he said, well, yeah, we could probably do that. And I said, do you think it would be all right if I brought a camera crew in with him to just kind of document it, so Walter will have a little something, a little keepsake? And he said, Bob, we're not going to authorize any interviews. He said, I'm just not going to do that. We've given our word. I said, but just bring the camera crew in and he said, all right, I will do it. But he said, we are not going to authorize any interviews. So at the appointed time and place, we went around to a back door, and the crew, the cameraman and the sound man and I were there, and Walter was there. And so they opened the door, and we walked in, and as we walked in, Walter reached over, got the microphone from the sound man, took it in his left hand, walked right up to the president, put it in his face, shook hands with his right hand, and said, Mr. President, are you going to take your flu shot? Well, the president knew what was going on, and he just roared with laughter, and he said, well, yes, Walter, I think that I need to set an example. We think this is a good program, and I am going to take my flu shot. Well, by that time, the White House press secretary was trying to wrestle the cameraman to the ground, and they were moving in and pushing us out and everything, and Walter said, thanks a lot. Well, anyway, to make a long story short, the CBS Evening News that night started in just this way. Good evening, President Ford told me in an exclusive interview on the campaign trail today that he would take his flu shot. Whereupon we proceeded to play that interview, all 12 seconds of it. Now, I always thought that was the biggest scoop that I ever got, and nowhere did it ever mention old Bob, nowhere did it ever have my fingerprints on it in any way, but there was one person that knew who knew how that came about, and it was Walter Cronkite. And from that day forward, Walter Cronkite always looked out for me, and I will never forget it. So I just want to say, and I know you have all been out there for a while, so I will cut this short. And if you do want to have some questions and answers, I'll be here to answer some questions. But I just want to say, I know how pleased Walter would have been with this evening and that this is going on. Walter never took himself very seriously, but he took the news very seriously. This would have pleased him greatly, and it would have pleased Betsy even more. Thank you. Oh, yeah. I'll test some questions.
Let me just say, though, Bob, and I think I speak for the entire audience when I invoke three words: worth the wait.
Oh, thank you.
Am I right?
Thank you. Want to do it?
Yeah, which one of you? Three questions from the audience.
Let me just answer one question, too. In this hectic day that we had, I had written a really nice speech to give tonight, and that really nice speech is sitting in the Admirals Club at DFW. But I mean, you know, I wouldn't be much of a reporter if I didn't remember what I had said, so I think I came pretty close to what was in the speech. But
This whole day has gone to hell. Sorry. Questions?
You know, the question was, how long is Greenland? And I will tell you this, I used to know. I know where to find that answer right now. That's a good question. You know, no, but I would love to. I would actually love to. We're going to have a concert. One of the greatest compliments I ever got, the last time I was here in Austin, and I'd come down here, I know what it was for the Texas Literary Festival. And we went out to a Mexican restaurant on Congress Avenue after you cross the bridge down there. And two people came up to me and said, "Where are you all playing tonight?" And I was just so thrilled by that.
This might require a little explanation. Bob is not only a great newsman, but he is also a writer and singer of country songs. And in 2008, performed on stage at the Grand Ole Opry with
Brad Paisley
and
Trisha
Yearwood.
Right? Yes.
Now, I don't know
and
if
Darius Rucker.
It might have been that or your journalistic career that led the Library of Congress to call you a living legend. Is that right?
Well, they did, but I don't know why they did. But maybe because I make stuff up. But I have to tell you, you know, I'm going to make a commencement address at Georgetown University Saturday to the continuing education students. And these are people that have gone back to school to get their education. Some of them, I mean, the reason they chose me is pretty obvious. You have to have somebody that's older than the graduates, you know, and so taking no chances, they got me. But one of the things I'm going to tell them, I mean, I used to tell kids at graduations, you know, don't be afraid to stretch. Don't be afraid to take a chance, especially when you're young, because you have such a long life ahead of you. You have plenty of time to make corrections. And I always say, you know, it's people my age that have to be careful about the decisions they make and have to play it safe. But you know, going to talk to this group of people, some of them are in their 60s, and I'm going to have to confess that while that's what I always tell these kids, I never followed my own advice. You know, I had planned to retire when I was 65, and instead I decided to stay around for a while, and I wrote a book, and it became a New York Times bestseller when I was 66. It was the first bestseller I wrote, and so then I was going to retire in 2006, I guess it was, whenever it was. And I decided not to, and then they asked me to do the evening news, which was the only job I'd not had in all the years I worked at CBS. And then, at age 71, the biggest thrill of all, being asked to sing at the Grand Ole Opry. So, I'm just saying to you, I don't know what age you are, but there's still a lot of stuff ahead of all of us. We don't know what's around the corner, so I don't care how old you are, keep stretching, keep reaching, and there's that great commercial on television right now, and it's these grown people, and one of them says, when I grow up, I want to be a painter. And another one says, when I grow up, I want to be a teacher. And the other one says something else. I mean, my advice to graduates, to people in this audience is keep a little part of you. Don't ever let it grow up. Because a little part of me that never grew up is having a hell of a time and dragging the rest of these old bones along. So that's what I would say.
By the way,
and the other thing is, you always have to give graduates advice. I advise them to never try to sing to their grandchildren because their parents have already told the children that you can't carry a tune. You can't win.
Go ahead. Don and I were having a conversation earlier in the evening, waiting for your arrival, and we were talking about the fact that Walter Cronkite retired in 1981, and perhaps prematurely. He regretted that decision later. You thought about retiring 2 years ago in 2008. And you were talked into staying by your boss.
Sean McManus.
Right. Mm-hmm. Tell us about that and what that year meant to you.
Well, I thought it was the most exciting year that I'd ever had as a reporter. Certainly the election, the campaign in 2008 was the most exciting campaign that I had ever covered. And I mean, I just wouldn't have missed it for the world. And I'll tell you what, to me, was the thing that had the greatest impact on me in that election. My first big story, my first national story, I'd gotten out of the Air Force in 1960, when was it? 62. And I had immediately, I never heard a shot fired in anger, and had immediately been sent down to Oxford, Mississippi to cover the enrollment of James Meredith at Ole Miss, and probably came as close to being killed down there that night when those riots broke out. And you'll remember there was a sniper that got up on the dorm roof and started shooting down into the crowd. 144 people were wounded or injured. Two journalists were killed. It was an absolutely a terrifying night. And I never set foot on that campus again, not because I didn't want to, but just because I had no occasion to, until October of 2008, when I went down there to cover the first presidential debate of that campaign year. And, I walked onto that campus, and it was a beautiful day, and there were white kids and there were black kids working together, Asian kids there. Governor Ross Barnett had stood on that campus and said, no black person will ever go to school at this school, which was a tax-supported institution as long as he was governor, he said. And yet to go back in 2008, and there was Haley Barbour, conservative Republican, old-time, Republican political operative. He was working just like those kids. And I said, Governor, what are you doing here? And he said, we want to make this perfect. And it was perfect. And they had that debate, and one of the candidates was an African American. And I want to tell you, as I watched that unfold, I thought to myself, we still have a long way to go in this country, but we have come a very long way. And it was one of those moments that you never forget. I would not have missed that for the world, And then the next week, Grand Ole Opry.
Pretty good year. Two more questions for Bob. Yes.
Bob Schieffer, how and when did you decide to become a news anchor?
The question was, how and when did Bob decide to become a news anchor?
I was in the 8th grade, and I wrote the first news story I'd ever written for the J.P. Elder Junior High School. The name of the paper was the Elder Yearling. That was the name of the paper. And you know, that little paper came out, and I saw my name set in type. I'd never seen it set in type, you know, and it just looked so fine there. I thought, this is really what I want to do. And so from there on, I thought about being a reporter. You know, my kids used to ask me, Dad, when you were a little boy, did you want to be a TV reporter? Well, of course, when I was a little boy, they didn't have TV. It didn't come to Fort Worth till I was in the 8th grade. But I really did, from that moment on. I was the editor of the school newspaper and the high school annual and all of that. And then I went to TCU, and after a 2-year detour, because my mother was convinced that what I really wanted to do was be a doctor. And I didn't. And it didn't want me to be a doctor either, I'll tell you that. I said something the other day. I didn't graduate magna cum laude. I graduated thank you laude. I got that diploma. I asked no questions and moved right out of there. But I got a job working at a little radio station in Fort Worth when the summer of my sophomore year, and majored in journalism. And I have had a job and gotten paid every week since that sophomore year, and it was a full-time job. I worked 44 hours a week, made $1 an hour, 90 cents for the first hour of overtime, 80 cents for the second hour, 70. I've never seen that kind of an arrangement. We always said if we worked 11 hours, we'd have to give them a dime. But anyways, that's how I got started. And then I went in the Air Force, where I edited a series of publications, came back and went to work for the Star-Telegram. After I went to Vietnam and for the Star-Telegram. When I came back, the local TV station, Channel 5, the NBC station, asked me out to be on a interview program to talk about the war. And afterward, they offered me a job, and it was $20 a week more than I'm paid at the paper. And I mean, I didn't have any money. I needed the money. And so that's how I got into TV, and then that led to CBS. But I always wanted to do it. And that's what I feel so grateful for, is that I had the opportunity to do as an adult what I wanted to do when I was a kid. And all through those years, I always admired Walter, and wanted to be like Walter.
Last question.
This one. Yeah.
Do you think you could honor us by singing a few bars?
Well, if I had my band, I wouldn't sound so bad, but maybe I'll just say a couple of verses for you. Probably the song, if I'm most remembered for, is a song I wrote about a guy who worked in a gas station, but he had a sincere face, and a TV consultant came along and made him a TV anchor man. And it goes kind of like this. Well, I was just a good old boy trying to get along, pumping gas, singing my songs. Had me a job at Stuckey's out on I-95. When a guy pulled up in a red Corvette, said, "Fill her up, but not just yet. First, let me look deep into your eyes." I said, "Son, that's not what I'm about." I said, I'm a cowboy from out at Lonesome Dove. He said, "Son, that's not what I'm about. I'm a news consultant, a TV scout. We're looking for an anchor man, a guy the girls will love. You don't have to know all that much, like names and dates and facts and such, because you got a face that reeks sincerity. I wasn't sure I understood, but indoor work sure sounded good, and he said we'd make TV history." And then everybody joins in and we sing the chorus, "Gonna be a TV anchor man." That's it. I have to tell you, I have written a new one. It's kind of biographical. And, I'm a cancer survivor, and it's about an old guy that he can't smoke and he can't drink anymore. And it goes kind of like this. I'm sitting here in my rocking chair thinking how things used to be about drinking and smoking and staying out late and what the girls used to whisper to me. Oh, how I love the good times, and I had me more than a few. But the drinking drove me near crazy, and the smoking a cancer or two. And he goes into the chorus, which goes like this. Now, I don't smoke, and I don't chew, and I'm not jealous of them that do. And you can put your whiskey back behind the bar, but I still like girls. It's a lot better with the musical instruments, drowning me out.
I want to offer 4 heartfelt thank yous. I want to thank you in the audience for your patience. I want to thank Don Carlton for his flexibility. I want to thank Bob Schieffer for his endurance. And I want to thank you all for an enormously memorable and entertaining evening. Thanks so much.
Thank you all. Thank you all. Thank you all.